hey everyone. Before beginning, I'd like to welcome those who've signed up to watch live. We've got some really exciting topics and stuff to discuss today. But before we dive into that, I thought I'd start off by giving myself a little bit of an introduction before handing over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm currently a senior manager at Storm3, a specialist health tech recruitment company. So I oversee our data team, working on data science, data engineering, and data analytics positions into sort of health tech startups, scale-ups, and enterprise businesses. But yeah, so a little bit of background for where this event actually originated from. So I've been aware of the disparities in healthcare between men and women for a while. I don't want to bore everyone by listing a load of statistics and figures and stuff. A quick Google search can show you some pretty surprising facts. But yeah, since joining Storm3, I've had so many conversations with data leaders in the health tech space, and it's become increasingly obvious to me, especially from talking to women within the space, that this discussion is one that deserves a lot more attention than it's currently getting. So I was somewhat foolishly under the impression that AI would reduce the bias in healthcare, but I think the rise of ChatGPT has exposed how AI can actually exacerbate this problem and further the bias and the gap in healthcare. So yeah, I know this can be a complicated area for those not directly embedded in it, and God knows how confusing I found it before working in it. But with this discussion today, we're hoping to educate and enlighten people to how data science can impact and actually improve people's health. So we're going to cover the experiences of women within a male-dominated field, the ways in which data science can positively or negatively affect women's health specifically, and then we'll wrap up with some possible solutions for any problems caused by this. So I've got 4 incredible women joining me today who are industry leaders in the health tech space. They're hugely knowledgeable about data science and how it works within healthcare, and I'm really excited to have them with me. So I'd like to hand over to them now to introduce themselves and their business. So Christine, if we could kick off with you, that'd be great.
Thanks so much, Fern. I'm Christine Swisher. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Project Ronin. Project Ronin is an oncology company that leverages data and AI to improve clinician experiences, patient outcomes, and empower patients. And before joining Ronin and at Ronin, I've led from idea to FDA clearance to clinical delivery in the US and in Europe. And I'm really passionate about responsible AI, but also innovation, and that we have a lot of power and we can really transform healthcare with data and AI.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Christine. Geetu, if I could come to you next, if that's okay.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Geetu Ambwani. I'm the VP of Data Science at Spring Health, and Spring Health is a comprehensive mental health solution that is used by a lot of employers and health plans in the country today. And we use, the secret sauce of Spring Health is that we use this thing that we call precision mental health care, which is essentially powered by data science and machine learning to really match people who are needing mental health with the right fit at the right time. So essentially being able to help them with the kind of care they need, whether it be coaching or whether it be a particular kind of therapy, and really being able to use data to do that. And my background has always been in data science and machine learning. I came to data science, but primarily if I think about the theme generally across my career, it's always been thinking about how to leverage data science in real world systems that are fairly complex. So not just like a technology innovation, but technology that's used in systems. So I work primarily in media as helping newsrooms use data science to sort of do their social media distribution or personalized recommendations. And then this last decade has been in health tech, which I think we're going to talk a lot about today, which is obviously a very complex and rich subject. So really looking forward.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's super helpful. And then Alison, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Fern. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having us. And it's always a thrill to be joined by a bunch of women in AI or in data science. I think like many industries in tech, it is a male-dominated field. I entered the field of AI through conversational AI specifically. And coincidentally, I was on a panel of women in AI at a festival in Los Angeles called the Fembit Festival when I met my co-founder, Audrey Wu. So these conversations are always very fruitful. Audrey and I initially were working in the field of conversational AI. My first company, Call to Flow, was a conversational AI design studio. I like to say I did chatbots before it was cool, before GPT was a thing, started back in 2017. Prior to that, I had a long career in healthcare consulting. And today I'm CEO and co-founder of Ruth Health, and we are a nationwide virtual clinic for pregnant and postpartum patients. We do primarily subclinical care, which is focused on comfort, joy, and self-care through the pregnancy journey at an accessible price and in an accessible way. So many of us know that, women's health has been in peril for basically eternity, but particularly maternal health is in a state of crisis. And in the US, we have the highest maternal mortality rate of any nation in the developed world. And in New York City, where I live, it is the city with the highest maternal mortality rate of any major city in the developed world. So our services are part of a constellation of new kind of up-and-comers in healthcare technology, where our mission is to reduce the maternal mortality rate, to reduce the severe maternal morbidity rate. And we do that with life-affirming as well as life-saving services, from pelvic training and recovery to lactation support, C-section recovery, doulas you can text message 24/7. And we're starting to pilot some really exciting programs with hospitals and healthcare systems around the country. We were also part of Y Combinator and received investment from United Healthcare. So we work from D to C all the way to B to B.
Amazing. Yeah, and then Cokie, last but not least, over to you.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody and be on the panel here. My name is Cokie. I'm the VP of Strategy and Analytics at Sermo, and Sermo is a physician engagement and insight platform. We have a panel of about 1.3 million healthcare professionals worldwide, and we do tons of market research with those physicians, helping manufacturers understand what physicians believe and think to help guide clinical trials, to help guide brand marketing. We also have a social platform that's designed specifically for physicians, where they can interact with each other, help solve patient cases, and really be part of an active physician community.
Yeah, amazing. Well, yeah, thanks so much for joining, everyone. Yeah, really, really excited to have you all here. So I guess now we can dive straight into the first topic, which is bias in data science. So yeah, to kick things off, I mean, tech is obviously such a male-dominated industry, and health tech, unfortunately, is not the exception to that. But yeah, I'm really keen to hear about what your personal experiences have been like as women in the space. Open question to everyone. I don't know who'd like to start. Maybe Alison, if we come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was trying to sit back because I'm always curious to hear other stories. But I mean, the four of us have very different backgrounds, but we've ended up in a similar place. And I don't think that my experiences are unique, but when I ran a conversational AI company, our clients were very big companies like Ulta Beauty and Keurig Dr. Pepper. We worked on the Andrew Yang presidential campaign. I mean, we were a very small studio working with much larger entities. Whenever I was at a conference or in a room full of specifically people from our field, not just our clients, I was routinely the only woman in the room. And I was also the only woman calling for diversification of data, calling for reform in training our AIs, training our natural language processing, and constantly updating models for changes in dialect, changes in, just lexical tendencies. Like, I had to beat the drum because nobody else would. And it was extremely frustrating to me because I'm not the only person who cared about this, but oftentimes I was the only person in that room. And so I always cite, in 2017, the UN called the use of female conversational AI assistants like Alexa, Siri. The UN declared it a human rights crisis because our children across the country were being raised, issuing orders to a woman that couldn't talk back. So, these issues are deep-seated. It's, Alexa came around in 2014, and unfortunately, I don't think much has changed. So we're still in a pretty rough place in terms of AIs being built, trained, and sort of customized for more so men than women.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, feel free to jump in if anyone else wants to.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a similar experience. It is, as somebody who went to, graduate school, postdoc, all in computer science, and then led technical teams. I'm often the only woman in the room. What I found is that if I even find an ally in the room to support me and really also own and be my authentic self. So I don't have to dress differently or be different in that room. I deserve to be there. And so that's one of the things that I've found is really just, believing in yourself and also finding supporters. The other thing is that women can have unconscious bias too. And so we have to look inward and also support each other and pull each other up, not tear each other down. So it's something that's also really important that we remember that responsibility that we have.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I just it's funny, Alison, my grad school research experience was actually speech recognition. So it was very much like looking at all of these data sets, we had these old, this is like, I'm aging myself, but we had these old data sets that were like primarily white male, certain accent from certain parts of the US, and they were obviously like very non-representative, right? Of like, especially as someone who was like an international student coming to the US, I was definitely always the it was definitely like there were very few women, right, and fewer even women of color if in grad school. So it was definitely starting out, it's always been my experience that like I think I'm just so used to it now that I don't even think about it. But I will say that one of the things that I've noticed is that back when I used to work in pure tech, or when it was more grad school where it was like more tech oriented companies, we had more international diversity, right? To Christine's point, it's like there's so many different types of diversities, right? And there was more like international people from different countries. And then as I moved into media or healthcare, now I actually see more diversity on the gender side, because at least in the newsroom, you can, like, even if it's not tech, right? Because our work is so cross-functional as data scientists, you're always in a room with like an editor, and then you have many female journalists and editors. Or in health tech, obviously, like a lot of caregivers are primarily women, and so you kind of get that aspect of diversity, but you may be missing out on like other aspects of diversity, like different countries. So it's always kind of like it's like a tough space of like, how do you balance and really create this like really rich, diverse environment where everyone's voice can be heard, and we can really create that space for everyone and have this notion of different perspectives.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is, I've been obviously in an analytics space now, but prior to analytics, I was in other very male-dominated industries as well. I started my career in consulting and then in finance, which were both very, very male-dominated as well. And I think one thing for me that's been actually really great to be in data science, transitioning from consulting and finance, is, you're centered around what can be a truth, right? Like you're centered around the data and the findings from the data, right? And it feels a little bit like in an industry like that, like there is some kind of like objective truth that you're aligning towards, as opposed to in finance and consulting, where there's really like no right answer sometimes, right? And it's like a much more relationship based. And so I found that actually transitioning into a data science world as a woman, that, there's actually kind of more of an advantage or more of an equality there than in a world of finance and consulting. I found that to be a really nice change.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yeah, thanks so much for sharing, everyone. I know we touched then several times about how teams have been mostly male. Geetu, I know you've sort of been part of several high-performing data teams. Why do you think data science is so important for health tech specifically? And then I guess as a follow-up to that, how does it add value to an organization, and how does diversity within data science do this specifically, would you say?
Yeah, sure. So I think just, if you look at health tech in general, healthcare is such an it's such an obviously important field, right? It like affects all of us, like how our health, like it affects like pretty much every single person on the population, right? Man, woman, child. But if you look at how our evidence base in medicine is built, it's just shocking how little data actually goes into it, right? So typically when you have, when you're launching a new therapy or even like some kind of like new practice of care, right? You would do like a clinical trial, which is pretty, it would be like limited to a certain sample of people, which would be probably like have a lot of internal validity, but then it's not representative necessarily of what happens when this therapy gets approved and goes out in the real world, right? And you contrast that, maybe the analogy that I think about is like, think about like the Google search engine, right? Where all of us use it every day. And then we take those, Google is like tracking those information of who clicked on this blue link and who did not, right? And then that makes the product better over time, right? So you're kind of like learning from every day the lived experience of the users of your product. And we don't really do that in healthcare. We kind of like have this divorce from, like you have this first step of evidence generation, you push something out there, and then you're kind of like, that's it. And then everyone else who ends up using those therapies, you have, like all of these real world practices, right? Of how medicines actually get used or how care gets delivered. And we're not like really feeding that back and creating like a learning healthcare system, which I think is really the promise of data science, right? And that's what building in those data science practices into healthcare, I think, can really create this sort of like learning and this feedback loop so that the system gets better and better. And really for me, the goal is, I think data science is really important because you want to learn from the experience of your patients today, right? So that you're building better care for the patients tomorrow. And that's really kind of like the goal. And then, I'm sorry. So then if we think about now, so that's kind of like the premise, right, of why data science is really important. Then it's like, how do you, and then we just talked about, just going back to that clinical trial example that I was talking about, a single clinical trial, like all of our evidence base, it's like based on like this very small sort of sample size, right, of people who are generally tend to be like, richer, whiter, and maybe not as representative of the population out there. So really you want to make sure that as you build these systems of care or as you build your products, you're really thinking about how do we not have that differential treatment, right, among these different groups? How can I collect enough data? How can I really design my product, right? So it's working for everyone and not just like a few people or the majority of the people. And so that's kind of like where diversity, becomes really important. And the best way really to have that diversity is to like make the people who are building the product be diverse, right? So that you have those people in the room while you're designing that. And so that's really how I think of, like the whole loop of like data science as like really contributing, first of all, to health tech, and then the importance of like thinking about diversity, but having it really embedded right through your process by having your teams be diverse, your process be diverse, and all of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's so many answers in data, and I just think we need to work on unlocking them and using the data that we've got available. But Alison, I know that you've got a lot of experience with AI teams specifically and understand the biases. And as you mentioned at the beginning, obviously with Siri and Alexa and stuff, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about what AI bias actually is and what it actually means for women and in relation to gender specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people look at AI as this thing that's going to revolutionize everything. And honestly, like that's pretty reductive and silly. AI is just a new technology. Like Geetu was talking about clinical trials. Clinical trials were a new technology in the 20th century. We didn't do much of that in the 19th century. So, I mean, I think when we talk about bias in AI, we have to remember that there is so much bias already built into our physical world and into, patriarchal systems, into the sort of like forced supremacy of white men in everything, whether it's government or technology or healthcare. So, by definition, AI is not going to save us, and it's not going to change us. It's going to replicate the biases of the physical world into the digital world. And so we can't fix the problem until we get to the root, which requires, in my opinion, and I have some radical beliefs about this, but I think it requires economic parity, social parity, political parity. So, if the tech industry is primarily staffed and built by white men, then women and especially women of color are not being represented, they're not being served. And so bias is going to have broad reaching effects, not just in the sense that, like your AI assistant in your home has a female voice and thus enforces a sense of subservience of women. It's much deeper than that. It's like Geetu was saying, in 1977 clinical trials, it was banned to use women or birthing people in clinical trials. That wasn't repealed until 1993. I was a small child when that happened, right? So not even in my entire lifespan have women been included in those clinical trials. Then, take that time and condense it to the time span of our work in AI. AIs have really existed for longer than most people think. And, some people would say your washing machine is an AI, but advanced artificial intelligence is what I would often say is almost intelligent, but it's not fully artificially intelligent. And that's because it can't change our societal norms, and it can't change the fact that this world is not built for people who look like us. So it will continue to result in, all kinds of issues, from Google's computer vision AI, which can't accurately recognize people of color who have dark skin. And I know there's been a lot of effort and programs at Google to change that. All the way through, ChatGPT not being the best at serving my team. We build products and services for women's health, and sometimes GPT is not great at generating the kinds of conversations we want to host.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it is such an important thing to consider, that AI is not going to actually fix all of the problems that we think it is just because it's called intelligence. And I think that's sort of like, especially me, like I can't speak for anyone else, but that's where I got misled before I sort of like did a bit more research into the space. But then I wanted to come to you, Cokie. I know gendered data, I guess, doesn't actually play a huge role in the data that you work with at Sermo. So do you think we should have to consider gender for every single question that we ask in a health tech?
Yeah, I'll kind of talk about a little bit of how Sermo's it's a little special in the way that the social platform works. Unlike other social platforms, Sermo is meant to be anonymous, right? Like you can reveal your identity or you don't have to. And I think that makes it a really interesting platform when we're thinking about kind of the parity that Alison was really mentioning, right? When we ask market research questions of our doctors, when they post something on the social platform, they can choose not to reveal their gender at all, right? So, I talked about sort of patient cases being posted on the Sermo platform, and you can, as somebody answering a patient case and giving your opinion or giving your feedback, right? Like you don't have to reveal that you're a woman or a man for that matter. And I wonder if something like that is actually creating more parity when you remove gender from the equation altogether, right? Because in some ways, like to Alison's point, it's about the parity of all voices being heard equally, right? And so that's a really interesting way that Sermo kind of like just removes gender from the equation on the social platform. And then similarly, when we look at market research data, right, we run thousands of surveys every year to help inform clinical trial design, to help inform product design, to help inform brand marketing, right? And in none of our screener questions really do we ever ask about gender, right? We ask about what specialty you are, where you're from. We don't even ask about age. We typically ask you years of experience, because these are the things that matter to when we look at the data. We don't believe that gender it should be relevant, right? Like your input and your kind of opinions about what will make a successful drug should not be based on your gender, right? It should be based on your specialty. It should be based on your years of experience. And these are the things that we look at in the data. And so, I think it's almost like the solution is one to hyper focus and make sure that we do get all representation, or it's almost like the opposite, like the total opposite, which is to remove gender from the equation altogether and just say, hey, like all voices count. It does not matter your gender. All voices count equally in this decision making.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's, like you said, there's no one size fits all rule for health. There's no one size fits all one size fits all rule for like equality and parity and everything. But yeah, I think everything that we've just sort of touched on really tees us up nicely for the next topic, which is going to be on how data can affect women's health, whether that be positive or negative. So Christine, if I could come to you first, I know we've spoken previously about the challenges facing women's health. How would you say the quality of the data and the technology used has an impact on this?
Yeah, I think that without representation in how we design AI and data-based products and the data that we use to build them, we risk making the biases automated and invisible. And so we can exacerbate the problem. But if we're thoughtful, if we have representation in our design, which means that we understand the origin of that data and the biases embedded in that piece of data, it is a reflection of what is actually happening in the real world. If we understand that and we're proactive in how we mitigate it and how we deliver it, what that user experience looks like, if we have representation in our voice of the customer research, if we have people on the team, ideally, that have an immersive experience with diverse experiences, then we're going to be much more likely to deliver on a product and capability that improves equity and instead of exacerbating it. The second thing is representation in the actual data itself. And so we need to prioritize the curation of those data sets and proactively go after getting those data sets such that we have sufficient representation of all the populations that we intend to serve. So of course, gender, but race, access to transportation, healthcare, income, all of those things are very important, that we actually have representation of the populations we intend to serve. And that the performance of our model is, or our technology is good for all of them. The other thing is, I think those are like a seatbelt, right? And then, but you also need an airbag and a brake, which means when it's in production, it's being used clinically to make decisions. You can't say, I validated it at the beginning. And I think that healthcare has a very much like this frozen publication, one-time validation, particularly around bias, that needs to change. And we don't actually see that as much in other industries where there is continuous monitoring, continuous validation of machine learning models and the data that feeds them. And so what we need to do is continuously and proactively look for bias, detect it, and have systems in place such that we can rapidly mitigate those issues.
Yeah, no, amazing. That was super insightful. Thank you. And then Alison, obviously you've got experience on the other side of things as the founder and CEO of Ruth Health. How would you say your experience has been affected by, I guess, what is known as like the algorithm in promoting Ruth Health?
Yeah, I mean, not to sound negative, but it's only been a hindrance. I mean, I'm in a very particular position. I think there's a lot of human health and women's health that isn't as particular as our field in maternal health. So we are both direct to consumer and B2B at Ruth Health. And that means that we target prenatal and postpartum patients on platforms like Google and Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We also have, partners that offer us as an employee benefit. We also have content licensing partners in the health and wellness space, and even work with, large payers and healthcare systems. So this really only affects our direct to consumer business specifically, but we have been running ads that promote, maternal health and wellness and reproductive health. We target only people who are over age 18. And we have, over the past year and a half, I think probably 7 or 8 times, had our paid advertising pulled. And it's primarily advertising where we're targeting, new moms who are breastfeeding. And there is an image of a mother breastfeeding and there is no nipple shown. But, Google and Meta and primarily their AIs, because they're not human beings auditing every single ad, are incredibly biased, and they are incredibly offensive because they do target these images of women breastfeeding. If a woman is showing skin around her breast area, if we're even using the term breastfeeding, if we use the word vagina, which is a part of your body, just like your elbow, these advertisements are systematically taken down. So we were very lucky to be a part of an amazing coalition of companies in women's and maternal health. It was formed by another founder in our space, and it's called the Center for Intimacy Justice. And so she set up basically just a nonprofit to try and lobby Meta and Google to fix this huge problem. And together we actually did make some meaningful change. Meta revised its global ads policy towards specifically sexual and reproductive health. So that means that they stopped targeting companies like ours as much, companies in menopause, sex education. We treat pelvic health conditions. So there's a lot of sexual and pelvic dysfunction. And so, you know, the question is whether this policy is going to be enforced by the sort of algorithmic processes behind Meta's ad engine. But, you know, it's important that we've made these strides. I think it's also still a pervasive problem. And just last week, we had ads pulled by Google because Google has new regulations around advertising any sort of health product. And so, you know, it's been exhausting. It's been frustrating. We routinely hear from our new patients across the country, because we're nationwide, that they wish they knew we existed for their first child. They wished they knew there were virtual care options. They wished they'd had an affordable doula option, because doulas are life-saving support systems. They reduce the chance of C-section, preeclampsia, preterm birth, and a lot of other terrible things that cause maternal death. So, you know, we're just so passionate about spreading these resources. And even if it's not ours, educating the US population about pelvic health, about doulas. But it's really hard to do that when there's so much bias in AIs that are actually limiting our ability to share and spread our mission and our message. So yeah, I mean, it's a constant uphill battle. And I think there's so many other examples of weaponization of data and of information about women's health. Obviously, the overturn of Roe v. Wade and the whole Dobbs fiasco is one of many struggles that we're encountering right now. And a lot of women have stopped tracking their periods out of fear that the data they put into an app like Clue for period tracking is going to be used against them. And, you know, as somebody who's worked in AI and data for a long time, I would stop doing that too. And I think there's a little bit of panic that may not be justified, but still, if you would rather be safe than sorry, continue tracking your cycle. It's really good for your health to track that cycle, but do it in a notebook. You don't need an app to do that. And until we have greater confidence in data security and data policy in this country, you know, the UK has GDPR, the UK and the broader EU has a lot more protection for consumers around their data. But here in the US, it's the wild, wild west. So I think any concern and any hesitation around sharing your data, particularly if you are a woman or birthing person, is justified.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've got a couple of follow-up questions for that. So the first one is going to touch on the first point that you touched on about marketing. So would you say that the difficulties in marketing can affect the potential for future investment and growing the business and yeah, expanding, I guess?
Yeah, they're a massive hurdle. I mean, I don't know if the other women here find that for their companies, but you know, for us in maternal health, it's definitely a hindrance. It definitely costs us time and money, and we don't have a ton of that. We're a pre-Series A company. We're really scrappy and lean. I wish we had the resources of some of these larger companies represented here, but we don't. However, we're also scrappy enough to find ways around it. It really stinks to have to use euphemisms and to not be able to say the words breast and vagina. They are body parts. They are normal. They are healthy, you know, words to use in our everyday language. And I wish we didn't live in a world where we had to encounter these types of biases and limitations. But yeah, we find a way. You know, Reddit doesn't have those limitations. Facebook mom groups don't have those limitations. But scaling a business in this industry is damn near impossible. There's a reason why we only have 2 unicorns in women's health. It's Maven and it's Kindbody or Progeny. But yeah, it's a huge
and Spring Health as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys serve not just women, is that right?
Yeah. Oh, I saw. Sorry, you meant I missed that. Yeah.
No, but I mean, April is really representing for all of us, as are you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then the second part that I wanted to touch on was obviously you mentioned about data security and privacy and stuff. Do you think that lax regulations in the US have a disproportionate effect on women's health compared to men's health? Sorry, Alison, yeah. I don't know. Sorry.
Yes, yes, an unequivocal yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because our reproductive rights are being systematically attacked in this country. Yeah, there's not enough data security for us to all feel safe reporting what's actually going on in our bodies. And in states like Texas, there are thousands of women accessing abortions underground. In states like Tennessee, thousands of women, hundreds of thousands of women and birthing people and trans people who are accessing gender affirming care and reproductive resources underground. They don't want their health insurance companies, healthcare apps, employers, families, or legislators to know what's going on because they're at risk of being, you know, at least imprisoned and at worst dying. So I think a lot of conversations around data and women's health seem to focus on privacy, and I want to elevate that to safety. It's not just about privacy, it's about like our ability to safely receive care without dying and without stronger data policy, without stronger protections on our reproductive rights. Thousands of women have and will die.
Yeah, it's not a positive outlook to have, but I guess it's the only outlook there is to have there. But yeah, over to Geetu. I know when we spoke previously, you were really passionate about showing that it's not all doom and gloom for women's health when it comes to data. Could you talk more about the potential for using data science to positively impact women's health and how it could actually help rather than sort of hinder, as the others have shared?
Yeah, definitely. But I'd like to, I just wanted to also like reinforce what Alison was saying earlier, right? Like even I think just in general, data sharing and policies in the US are, and the GDPR as well. It's no great, it's not like they've solved it. I think it's just like a super complex topic, and the more, and it's really, really important, especially for companies like ours, to be taking that really seriously, right? Like I spend a lot of time with our legal counsel thinking through like, how can we be super protective of, you know, mental health data, and like all health data, right, is like super sensitive, and how can we create that trust in our, you know, in our members that they can share the data with us. It's not going to go back to their employer or used in a way that's like harmful. I think it really cuts across, and it's something that all of us in the industry, there's like a lot more work for us to be doing for sure. And it's not solved like, you know, and I'll be honest, like recently at Spring Health, I think Alison, you were talking about this, about the tracking apps. Like it's one of those things that as a data person, and it might be that I'm over paranoid because I usually, you know, you're kind of like aware of all the places that things can go wrong. Like I tend to like never use any of the apps. I never use, like I don't even use our own Spring Health program, right? Because I'm just like not sure. Like I'm just like concerned about like what are different ways. And I recently started using it like last year, but then we put in like all of these policies, and it's so important to like put yourself also in the shoes of that user, right? And think about like, here are all the ways that things can go wrong, and really, really take that responsibility seriously, right? Because it's a privilege for us to be like in this field and be given sort of, you know, the ability to impact so many lives, and it's great. And that's why conversations like these are also so important, right? That we are like holding ourselves to that higher bar. So to just go back to your original question. So I think, you know, so there's all of these like ramifications, right? As we talked about, like Alison and Christine talked about. But I think on the positive side, like, again, I'll give a personal example. For me, I was one of those, you know, new moms who had I had a lot of postpartum depression. I didn't know what was going on. You know, it was something that, even though like I'm fairly educated, aware of mental health, had no stigma per se. It just didn't even occur to me because I was just so completely overwhelmed with everything that was going on as a newborn that, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I wish that I had gotten an email from Spring Health or whoever it was that my employer was using saying, hey, check this out. And it would have changed things dramatically for me. And so that's kind of like the image that I always keep in mind, right? When I think about like data has all of this, there's all these things that can go wrong, but oh my God, there's so much power and there's so much potential. And how can we leverage that, right, to personalize the way that we approach care, right, today? And that's that's kind of how we tend to think about it at Spring and at other obviously health tech companies that I've worked at. And so I think when I think about ways like that, there's the marketing, the marketing that Alison is trying to do right now. That's really, really important because it's targeted. She's trying to reach out to people who actually need help, right? And so that is also the algorithm, right? It's just the algorithm from her company at play, but then we have obviously these bigger companies to contend with who have different maybe perspectives right now. So, but it's really I think it's inevitable for us to be using algorithms in some way because that's the only way we can scale up, right? Our healthcare system and really get better. But it's just a question of how do we do this really, really thoughtfully, right? And be aware of the biases and the downsides, right, of introducing these kinds of systems that can learn on their own. And then, are we perpetuating biases? This is kind of very much ingrained, even in our standard ML interview process. One of the big questions that we asked you in the ML interview at Spring Health will always be build some kind of recommender system. And then at the end, there's a huge section dedicated to okay, do you realize now you've just self-reinforced the bias on this, right? And what are you going to do about it? And it's always interesting to see how many people get it and how many people aren't even thinking about it because it's not because you're so used to sometimes in school just thinking about this model as this, you built this system and now you're done. And what happens after you put it out there? Then it's what Christine was saying, the monitoring, the, how do you keep it safe and within the guardrails and doing what you needed to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's so important to have just even the discussions that have sort of been brought up, the points that have been made, just having women in a position where they can make those decisions and they can say how important would it be to have, reach out to pregnant mums or new mothers so that they're aware of this care. And if a man were in your position, maybe he wouldn't have that thought. And it's important to have people in place such as yourself so that those things do get brought up. I don't know if anyone has anything that they'd like to add to.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I think one of the things that you see for physicians per se is the Hippocratic Oath. They make this oath and it's really understood that there's sort of moral principles and a responsibility that you have in that role. And as data science, AI leaders, and also our practitioners as our teams as well, we need to understand and really train, not just in the interviews, but in graduate school, when they're entering industry, in our companies, having continuous education about the power that they have. There is actually a data science oath about which I urge everyone to have a look at, but it's a really powerful thing to ground your teams in and just sort of remember that, we have a responsibility and we have to understand the consequences of using that data and what we build, and that these are not just meaningless numbers without context, but they represent real people and situations. So I just wanted to add that piece.
No, that's really useful. Cokie, did you have anything?
No, I think it's really interesting. One of my good friends from school, he was trained as a physician and then moved into a product role. And one of the reasons he moved into a product role is really he wanted to kind of make a difference at a a scalable level, right? As a doctor, you're really making a difference at a personal level. And as a product, he's a product manager, and he wanted to make a difference at scale. And I think that really goes back to Christine's point, which is this data science oath. It affects people at grand scale. And, to everybody's points, right? This is affecting people's livelihoods. These affecting people's survival, right? Like these are things that really affect people at grand scale and in really like kind of just very, very impactful ways. So yeah, I mean, I think it's like, not to say that the Hippocratic Oath is not important, but the data science oath is just even like more, potentially more impactful at grander scale.
Yeah, no, definitely no. I mean, yeah, 100%, completely agree. I guess onto solutions then. Open question to everyone. What are the solutions? Are there solutions here? How do we go about making a change and yeah, making AI more responsible, reduce the bias?
Fern, this is my favorite question. I have a very simple answer. Hire women, pay women, include women in your research pools, make sure N equals a lot of women. And, you know, I think it goes all the way down to educational reform, because what, you know, Cokie and Christine were referencing in terms of like training programs and like how physicians are taught versus how data scientists are taught, what sort of professional oaths and commitments we make. Like this problem would not exist if a woman were the CEO of Google, if a woman had founded Facebook, and if women were the sort of majority of hospital and healthcare leaders. So, you know, not to call for things to be set on fire and torn down, but like we really need to replace the leaders in both healthcare and technology with more women. And, you know, that's part of why it's so important to me to run a healthcare technology company. That's why, you know, Geetu and her CEO at Spring, April Ko, who's an old classmate of mine from college, like these, you know, women like the four of us here today and like you, Fern, are the potential for the future and probably the only solution, because I'm a firm believer that these AIs that we already rely on have been trained on too much biased data. We can't start from scratch, but women leaders and a greater population of women as data points is going to be our best hope.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've just said, but yeah, open to everyone else if you want to.
I feel like Alison covered it really well. So it's like higher.
Yeah. So just simple solution.
I will share a tactically a sort of this is just because I'm assuming also there's probably a lot of women right in our audience. So this is something I learned just as when I was earlier on in my career. I was really, really lucky in that one of my jobs early on, there was, and this was like a mistake, I think, by the HR person, obviously, but one fine day on a Friday afternoon, I logged into my laptop and there was an email that got sent out to the entire company, which was basically from the HR department, and they had by mistakenly added attached an Excel sheet of everyone's compensation for the entire department or something, or like 400 people or something to that effect, with names. So it was like name, salary, bonus. I was obviously, that poor person probably got fired, but God, they changed my life, because I wish that I had taken note of who it was, because I would love to go back and thank them. So essentially, I obviously, as a data person, I got this Excel sheet. So then I was able to do all kinds of like analyses on it. And then, you know, I had a few mentors and I could see how much bias there was in the compensation for myself for this thing. And that was really, it just, you know, it's like you always know, right, that there's bias, but it's different when you kind of like see it laid out there in the evidence. And it just like changed, you know, how seriously I took like all of these like negotiation, compensation, and just like became much more like vocal and a bigger advocate for myself. And then that's something that I've always taken very seriously. And even as a leader on my team, obviously, you know, I'm always pushing our people team to make sure that there is, you know, every 6 months we have like this sort of like equity reviews, and these are pretty standard practices these days at big companies. I don't think the thing that happened to me a few years ago is something that would happen necessarily, but I do think it's like really important for you all to like demand that, right, and make sure that that is happening, because there is all, I think some of that inequity and why we see fewer women in tech is because we aren't like, you know, we aren't like taking our, I think one is like advocating for ourselves enough, but also like making sure that the systems are built, right, so that we are ensuring equity
sustainable
across all lines, not just gender, just like, yeah, everything.
Yeah, Cokie, I know when we spoke previously, like you mentioned something similar at Sermo, like when those reviews came around and you were sort of very active in playing that role for the women in your team.
Yeah. So this particular example that Geetu raised, it's like we sort of, we just did a round of, performance and appraisals and salary rises. And, in many ways, it's subjective on the manager, right? And when I look at, my entire team, you're like, okay, everybody gets, 3% or 4%. And then you look at people in very similar ranks and you're like, but wait, this woman is getting paid like slightly less than the man, like, but why, right? Like, and these are the things that I think as a woman leader, you're very attuned to. Whereas if a man were in my position, maybe they wouldn't have even like thought it was an issue, right? And so for me, it was like, this particular thing, like, I was like, I would never want anybody at the company to look at this and say, like, why are these two people in exactly the same position with very similar backgrounds getting paid different? And so, like, should the woman get really like, that extra point just to get them to parity? And to me, that was really important for, as a principal, as a leader.
Yeah, and of course, it's not necessarily like one specific company, but something that's happened throughout someone's career, like just a lot more sort of men maybe more vocal when they're talking about salary raises or like arguing for a higher salary, and then it has a lasting impact throughout their career when they change companies and they want an increase from their current salary and they haven't looked at like market rate or anything.
Yeah, all the women on my team have heard this story, and then
yeah.
it ends up really burning me at performance appraisal time, because then they come to me and I'm like, no, that wasn't, I've already adjusted it. It's important. I feel really proud that like I taught them. I'm like, eventually when they have another manager, for them.
Yeah, exactly. Pay forward. You've got to keep it going. Yeah,
just a quick anecdote, because Geetu, that's an amazing story. So similar but not as risky thing happened when I started my career in conversational AI. I got to join this amazing group. I highly recommend anyone here or in the audience who's interested in conversational AI specifically join. It's a global org called Women in Voice. I opened the New York City chapter, but it's just a wonderful professional organization of women who specifically focus on natural language processing, conversational AI. There's conversation designers all the way to AI ML engineers and data experts. But we had a very similar, conversation amongst us in our chapter, and everybody was sort of wishing for what happened to Geetu, but it didn't. And so we built a spreadsheet that had about 200 individual people's title, company, and compensation. And none of those employers knew that we were doing it. So Google, Facebook, Wells Fargo, big blue chip companies had employees who contributed, but the good part was you weren't required to put your name. So it was a completely anonymous list, but just with company, title, salary. And it showed us that we were dramatically under earning our male peers, because once we had the salary list of women involved, we tried to get male peers to enter in a different tab. So it's a really simple tactical thing that anyone can do. I wouldn't try to do this within your company, because that can stir the pot and kind of bite you in the foot. But what you can do is survey fellow women in your profession, and then have each woman try to tap a man. And so that's why, like, I'm a really firm believer that all of the things we're talking about have to include advocacy from men. So I just dropped a link, and HealthTech is another founder in the women's health space, and she put together this awesome list, 21 ways men can support gender equity in the workplace.
Amazing. Yeah, I can share that afterwards with the intel when we send that out afterwards.
I guess one thing that I wanted to touch on is, is that company, your leadership in your company. So us as leaders here, as well as, if you're looking at your leadership team, what you should expect is that they're not passively ensuring equity, but rather actively. So they're filling the funnel with diverse, qualified candidates. There are, many engineering, technical candidates that are in the funnel and qualified, and we're passively recruiting them, that we remove unconscious bias in how we interview, what our job description is. We train our teams in how to interview them. And then we have diverse leadership, so they see representation of themselves. They can see a career path. And then of course, compensation has to be, be part and ingrained in your philosophy about compensation and promotion. And so I think those are some of the steps, is that it cannot be passive. It has to be an active thing that your leadership team does. And we know that companies that are diverse, that have gender and racial diversity, outperform their peers. It's well studied and well understood. There was, I think, a McKinsey study published not too long ago showing that they outperform on the national averages on many metrics.
Yeah,
so it's not just the right thing to do, it is also the smart business thing to do.
Smart business thing to do. Yeah, I just want to add also everything that Christine said, it actually does work also, right? Like having that it pays off, like at Spring now. And I think this is partially because because we have like women leaders who started out, obviously the company with April, and then my team as well. And then we have several other really strong leaders. Like our data science team is 65% female to male, actually, like, which is I think like pretty rare in the industry. And it's something I'm really, really proud of. But it wasn't, it took a lot of work and it took like an active amount of like energy. And I think it really is like a testament to like all of these practices really, really do work, but you have to like invest in them and take the time out to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's not going to be something that changes overnight, but I think, even just having this conversation is like a step in the right direction, right? Like the first step is education. And hopefully, like with people seeing this, and we'll go out and implement things that even if they didn't realize there were problems, that they can sort of like take it forward. We are about to run out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much to Alison, Geetu, Cokie, and Christine for joining me today. It's been such an insightful conversation. I hope everyone listening has found this as interesting and eye-opening as I have. We're going to make the recording available post-event for anyone that wasn't able to join or that would like to listen again. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to those who joined, and yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of their day.